President Volodymyr Zelensky facing rebellion from his own troops? Well, if we go by multiple reports coming in from Ukraine, soldiers have been shocked and in disbelief as Russian military marched on in Kharkiv without any opposition. Ukraine has pulled back its troops from several villages in the border region of Kharkiv, following continued pressure from Russian forces. Earlier, Ukrainian soldiers had come under heavy fire in the region and moved to what they call more advantageous positions. But remember, throughout the course of this two-year war, Ukraine has used this type of language to signify a kind of retreat from an area. President Volodymyr Zelensky has cancelled all upcoming foreign trips as his troops struggle to contain the new cross-border incursion, with thousands being evacuated from Kharkiv. In fact, the rebellion and the lament by Zelensky's soldiers raises some tough questions on Ukrainian military leadership. They're speaking of the fault lines in Kiev's strategy and exposing the loopholes on ground. Russia, meanwhile, has claimed to have captured 10 villages in the region already, and it only serves them well to further push Ukraine. Now, amid all of this, America's Antony Blinken is currently in Kiev, while parallelly, President Vladimir Putin will be in China tomorrow. But how is this war really panning out? Let's also quickly talk about that and get an understanding of the on-ground situation. On the broadcast, I'm joined by Maria Mezentseva. She's a Ukrainian MP and head of the Ukrainian delegation to the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly. I'm also joined by Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at IDSA. Good evening to both of you, ladies. Maria, let me start with you first. There are reports coming in that President Zelensky is facing rebellion from his own soldiers. Is that true? What is happening in Ukraine?
This is not true, and thank you for this opportunity to explain. We are currently, I'm reporting from the city center of Kharkiv, my home city. There are severe attacks on the northern part of the region by Russian troops, and we were expecting some of these developments because the surveillance could see that there is around 45,000 Russian troops next to the border with Ukraine up in the north of Kharkiv region. Currently, the morale of Ukrainian soldiers is high, and they're counterattacking. The small villages, there is about 8 villages that are temporary under Russian occupation, so they're trying to make a buffer zone. Daily basis, Russian army is shelling this city of Kharkiv, which is 1.3 million people, and smaller towns across the region, targeting school, hospitals, private houses. Just yesterday evening, our city Kharkiv was targeted with air bombs, leaving dozens wounded and at least 1,200 apartments, which you can see on the screen, without doors and windows. That is, of course, very disturbing, and it means the massive war crimes are continuing to be conducted by the Russian army against civilians. So they are not even
But Maria, let me then also understand from you what explains President Zelensky cancelling all his engagements for the time being. You know, if this was expected and there was no issue on ground, what makes President Zelensky completely cancel all his engagements?
I have not had any kind of this information, neither coming from the office of the president. President Zelensky continues his brave international diplomacy. I would like to take your attention to the fact that we're expecting peace summit in June in Switzerland, where, of course, Indian counterparts are also invited and many others across the globe. It must be really a global summit for peace as a first step to understanding that war crimes have to be addressed. The crime of aggression, which Russia is conducting since 2014, has to be addressed by creating a special tribunal for war criminals. Of course, you see every war crime and it's registered. There are victims of different type of even sexual violence, forcible disappearance. Let's not forget about around 20,000 deported children, Ukrainian children who were forcibly transferred to Russia for the reason of safety, so-called. And ecocide, you see burning trees, you see land full of wounds because of artillery and Russian bombs, which are hurting our nature and fauna. So President Zelensky continues his diplomacy. Yesterday, there was a visit of Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken. They spoke about air defense, which can cover not only the territory of Kharkiv region, but all of Ukraine. And these are systems Patriot. And I would like to say every country like India and others can participate in peace formula, because as United Nations calculated, it caused difficulties to different population in more than 90 countries and about 2 billion people on the planet Earth. It's also about food safety, energy security, and other things. So not only about military
Maria, of course, we know that there are a lot of challenges, the ripple effects of the war that have been suffered, not just by Russia and Ukraine, but the entire world. The geopolitics has changed due to this war. But let me also get in Dr. Swasti Rao on this. Dr. Swasti Rao, you have Antony Blinken visiting Kyiv. US, on one hand, keeps on urging the war to stop, keeps on saying that this kind of aggression, this kind of violence needs to stop. Yet, simultaneously, parallelly, they keep giving financial aid and arms and ammunition to, go on with this war.
Well, good evening to you, Shreya, and a very good evening to our Ukrainian guest, Maria, out there. So you asked me a question on basically America's role in Ukrainian war. And yes, I mean, there is a way in which we can understand it, which is that America has been the largest military supplier to Ukraine. There's no doubt about it. And you know what happened when there was a break in that military supplies. For the last 6 months, Ukraine has been outgunned and outmanned. I think the technical problem is something else, which is that if the Americans want the war to end, they should actually give Ukraine what the Ukrainians have been asking for, number one. If the Americans are not able to give to Ukrainians what the Ukrainians have been asking for, number one, and also not create conditions. So, for example, it is not just about the weapons that are coming from America. There's only half the story. The other half of the story is that the Americans have also, and not just the Americans, but also the Europeans, have also created these conditionalities that these weapons cannot really be used for Russian territories or Russia claimed territories. So basically, long story short, the way in which the military supplies have been reaching Ukraine ensures that this becomes an endless war of attrition. So from the American calculus, perhaps it gives the perfect window to bleed an adversary in Russia in an endless war. But from the Ukrainian perspective, of course, as we all are seeing, that this is resulting into massive humanitarian crises and blunder and all of that. So I would be of the opinion that if America is serious about supporting Ukraine, and if Antony Blinken, and not just Blinken's, I mean, we all know that in November there could be a completely different change in the US. So how serious would the US then be? Will the Europeans be ready by then to actually step up their military support to Ukraine? So these are questions that do not have clear answers. So despite all the valor with which the Ukrainians have been fighting, I see that the way in which the aid has been reaching them has been rather counterproductive, because they are not giving them what they require, but giving them enough to barely sustain, and therefore the war goes on. Then again, just my last point here, because it's an opening remark, I do not mean to say that the Russians have been performing very well, because for a military superpower as formidable as Russia, with every possible numerical superiority, technological advantage, weapons advantage. For the last 6 months, Ukraine has been lying outgunned and outmanned. And to be, I'm actually surprised as to why can Russia not finish the war and not really take advantage, because all I see, and as you mentioned, is that, for example, there are two main axes of battle that is where the fighting is happening. One, of course, the focus is on the eastern front, where I'm sure you're now aware of these cities like Avdiivka and Yarchasiv, etc., around Bakhmut. That's the eastern front, and that is very crucial for Russia's conquest of the entire Donbass. Okay, and the other one, which actually started on 10th of May and which caught everybody by surprise, was in the north near Kharkiv. Right, but what you do see from the Russians is that perhaps they do not really have, because that particular offensive has also stalled. As we are talking, the Russians have taken about 8 to 10 villages, and that offensive is also stalled. So now we understand that perhaps the Russian idea.
Point taken, Dr. Swasti Rao. The fact that both sides need to introspect. But let me take this across to Maria. Maria, you yourself have listed out the kind of destruction and death that Ukraine has seen. And I'll go back to the start of this war. The moot reason for starting off this war was Ukraine getting NATO membership. 2 years, more than 2 years
No,
into this
no,
war,
it's not
that
about
still
that.
hasn't
I'm sorry.
happened. Is there a realize?
Yes, thank you for this
But that
important
that was one
question
of the
because
major
it's
reasons. That was one of the major reasons, Maria.
no,
And
no, no, no.
and
It's what Russia.
even if that was
It's what and thank you for posing this question. I will explain. It's a historical issue. Russia continues to think that they can be an empire of a state which can control another 15 former Soviet republics. It cannot. Our people at the referendum of 1991, as well as other former Soviet republics, and my parents and my grandparents voted to be independent. Ukraine is an independent state under UN conditions, under international law, and Russia disrespects international law. It did it in Moldova, it did it in Georgia, it does it in Ukraine since 2014. This war was prepared to take over Ukraine, to make it dependent somehow on natural resources, etc. It did not happen. We stood as we did 1,000 years ago, and we're doing it today. So NATO membership is not a condition of Russia invading Ukraine. That's what Russia tried to explain. But look, Finland and Sweden joined recently. Why then Russia is not invading them? If we go on with such a philosophy, they should. I am suggesting because this is
Maria,
just something
that's
we're
the Ukrainian perspective, and that's the Russian reasoning that had come out to start this war. But let me also complete what I was asking, that one of the reasons that they had given was that we don't want Ukraine to join NATO. So far, that has not happened. President Zelensky has talked about it earlier. The US has talked about it earlier, that Ukraine will get NATO membership. That hasn't happened more than 2 years into this war. Do you not think that that also perhaps is something that one should be looking at, and that, that because your own president had been talking about it and saying that we will be joining the NATO, that is something that you need to question Europe and America about?
Dear Shreya, I think we should ask our people about EU and NATO membership. It's enshrined in our constitution since 2018 as a special amendment. Currently, we had question time, and around 90%, in different regions, 92% support EU and NATO membership. But this is sovereign choice of Ukrainians. Why Russians should dictate us? What do we have to do? Would that be fair if Russia would say something like that to India, I don't know, United Emirates, Italy, France, other states? This is an attempt to overrule a sovereign choice of Ukraine, and Russia can't, and Putin himself and his politics, they can't understand that we are a sovereign state, which is an independent one. Yes, unfortunately, we are having the largest border specifically with Russia, and Russia can't fly to Mars. It will remain with us probably forever, but we hope not in the state of this aggressor empire, which it portrays to the whole world. Please agree. I think everyone understands we would have less problems globally if Russia wouldn't reinvade Ukraine in February 22. This war is bringing a lot of more horror just to Ukraine, but to the whole world. And Russia doesn't comply
to
international law.
That is absolutely correct, Maria. Nobody wants war. Nobody wants death and destruction. And so, of course, world leaders have been urging both sides to stop the war. But Dr. Swasti Rao, what do you make of it? How do you see this really moving forward now? The fact that, more than 2 years into this war, obviously there is a lot of lethargy that's also setting in on the ground. There is a lot of vagueness that has set in between political leaderships as well as to how to move about. There are elections involved now in different countries on which this war will have an impact.
I think these are very important questions about where do I see it going. Of course, everybody understands that it has already become a war of attrition for a variety of reasons. I don't know. We have the time to actually get into the details of why has that become a war of attrition. On the one hand, you have to sort of understand is that somewhere this argument that Russia is the victim is also not a completely correct argument, which is because I think Maria is technically correct on that count that Ukraine could not have become a member of NATO because NATO would not have taken a member with a territorial dispute. And the question that you were asking about why doesn't NATO take Ukraine, it cannot because there's an active war going on. And if NATO were to take Ukraine now, the Article 5 would always be triggered, and which would mean an endless world war. So I think these are technical issues. But yes, like I said, that it has become a war of attrition. Otherwise, where do I see it going? I think till the time that you have Ukraine has the support of the West, if not the US, then let's see. Like I said initially, that there is a massive transformation which is also underway in Europe. They are also doing lots of things with Trump, with the likely return of Trump in DC. So, I mean, we will have to see if they are able to sort of support Ukraine in the way that Ukraine requires. Okay, and then we will also
Okay.
have to see that because even in Russia, see, you have to understand that everything in Russia is also not going hunky dory. Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, has been replaced
Sure.
only yesterday or a couple of days ago. And the person who has now been made the defense minister is basically an economist. And this itself shows that the war cost and all the rising costs that are around this war effort from Russia are also a problem. Because, I mean, where otherwise would you see an economist taking over as a defense minister? So let's not assume that everything is hunky-dory in Russia. Last year, you also saw something like a Prigozhin mutiny that had happened. That's another thing. We also will see how far
Yes.
mobilization efforts will go, because as you know that Putin has been now just sworn in as the new president again, and then he has still not announced for
Yes.
mobilization, and everybody was expecting that Putin is going to be starting the mobilization. So what I'm saying is that there are problems on both sides, there are
Yeah.
vulnerabilities on both sides, and both sides are evolving. But in the case of Ukraine, the vulnerabilities are very clear. Okay,
Right.
in the case of Russia, of course, the vulnerabilities are
Right.
of a different type. So I think it will, to some extent, we will see what the battlefront yields, and on the other hand, we will also see where the negotiations go. And in that regard, I think this diplomatic
Yeah.
effort that
Yeah.
Ukraine is trying to
That's
have
something
around
that has
this
to
peace
happen
summit in Lithuania,
simultaneously
yes. So we will see
and
where
more
that goes.
effectively. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, but Russia can stop
All
the
right.
war
We'll
in
leave it
one.
there. Dr. Swasti Rao. Yes. Dr. Swasti Rao and Maria, thank you very much for speaking with us on Nation Tonight. Maria, please keep safe. Please take care of yourselves. Thank you very much to both of you for sparing your time on Nation Tonight and sharing your perspective. Thank you very much.